Hi, I'm Dan Horner. I'm with my friend and videographer, Tony Benici, who's also our video producer. Tonight we're at the shop of Norm Ross, who's going to talk to us about segmented bowls. But before we get started, Norm, why don't you tell us how long you've been in the club?
Well, I come up here in 2007, and I think I joined a year or two later. You know, Bob Milton introduced me to the club. He's a long-time member, and he hasn't been around the last year or so, but he's the one that got me involved in it up here.
Yeah, it's a great thing.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't you tell us about segmented bowls?
Well, segmented bowls are, instead of turning a bowl from a solid block of wood, you know, you cut out a circle out of half a tree and however long it is, and then you just hollow the whole thing out. So basically you're throwing a good 90% of the wood away. A segmented bowl is made out of a series of strips of wood, all glued together in rings, which are then glued together in a stack, which are then turned. And that's how it all starts. But to begin with, you have to have a plan. So you got to know how many segments are in the bowl, what's the biggest diameter you want to make, and so on. And there's several ways of coming to that. There's some formulated ones which are far beyond me as far as formulas to figure all this stuff out. Or you can go online and copy a whole bunch of plans, like as we have here. Or you can just outright draw a full-scale one, you know, by hand, and it works out. It would look like that if you wanted to draw one out to your own design. So most of these bowls that are in these particular plans the wood is actually 3/4 of an inch thick from, you know, here, and then whatever your lengths and your widths are. And how I start is, I was fortunate to have given to me by a friend a bunch of raw, rough cut maple, and that's sitting. Here's a board. Here's one of the boards over here that I've got, and that's just rough sawn. You know, from I think a chainsaw mill did this actually, and then you resawed it down, you plane it, surface it, and then cut it into strips. And once you've got that done, let me put that back here. Then you go to your plan, and you start out like we'll start out with, say, a four stacked segmented bowl. So you've got 4 stacks. 1, 2, 3, 4. So stack number 1, or ring number 1, you go over here, ring number 1, and by the way, we're making a 12 segmented bowl, which means the angle between the segments is 30 degrees, or 15 degrees per side, which we'll explain to that as we go along. So number 1, 12 sides. You need 12 pieces, of course, and it tells you the layer height, which is 3/4 of an inch. And on this particular bowl, the outer diameter when finished will be about 6 inches. And you want to make the wall thickness, well, whatever you can make it. You want to get it down to under 1/4 would be kind of nice. And then it tells you your miter angle, you know, which will be the angle you cut the segments at. The edge length, which is the actual length of each segment, like this one to here, from here to here, here to here, and so on. The board length overall to make that full 12-inch or 12 segment ring is, you need, in this case, 20 inches and 11/16 inches. And the first segment, the segment length is 21/32. Now that's not exact. If you're out a little bit, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to eventually turn it down, because all you're going to use is the inner, probably 1/4 inch or less of the actual wall thickness of the wood you're cutting. And then when it's glued together, the actual segments around like this on ring number 1 will be 6.5 inches. So there you go. Finished all the raw lumber. I've edge jointed it. I've planed it. And now I cut it into widths. So the first width, we'll take number 1 here. There's your 3/4 inch height. And the actual width of the board, it says, is 21/32. So that's from here to here. So then you need to cut them into segments. But how do you get that exact 15-degree angle? Well, that's the tricky part. There's a guy by the name of Jerry Bennett. You know, I found him on YouTube, and he's the guru of a jig called a wedgie sled. Now this here is a wedgie sled. It's all totally adjustable for different angles, because you can make a 12-segmented bowl or a 16-segmented bowl, all the way up to 48 segments or more if you wanted, depending on how many, what sort of bowl you're making. But on this particular one, I'm making a 12-segment bowl, and the angle is 30 degrees. So this is a 30, 60, 90-degree triangle. And then each segment is 15 degrees. So when you join them together, that makes you a 30-degree angle. So what I do is I've marked it on here. This is the first measurement. Doesn't have to be that exact. You set it somewhere in here, lock her down, and then you put this thing here, and you slide this up. And as you're sliding it up, let's get it out of the way here. Slide it up, and then as far as it goes now, you've got an exact 30-degree angle. You'll lock that down. Now, so now we've got our 30-degree segment or angle ready to be cut. Now the first length, the actual segment length, is, where are we here? 1 11/16. So you take your ruler, and this is another little jig here. It's just it just slides back and forth. If you don't want to use it for cutting the small segments, this works really good because you're not using a great big fence. So you put that in here somewhere. Take your ruler and you measure, what did I say, 1 11/16. So there's your 11/16 right there. Now again, this measurement isn't that critical, but as long as each segment is exactly that length, then you're okay. But if one's a little less or a little more, then your circle isn't gonna line up. So now I've got that set. So now I take my first. I'll just use a sample piece here. Okay, here's my set, and then first of all, you need to cut your first angle, because this is just a square piece of stock now. So you put it in here, and I'll turn this one on. Goggles in my helmet, and I'll show you how that works. I should have my. I won't worry about the dust collector. Just take a random cut, just a little bit off. Here's the first angle, 15 degrees. You take it, and you cut it, and you need to go up to this side. Go this way. You can fasten it out. Right up to it, and it goes up against that stop. Now you notice this little angle thing here. See how the thing slid off out of the way? Well, you don't get the blade and kind of hit them and damage the cut. And you turn it over again. Right up there, and you see that. So you keep doing that now until you got all 12 segments cut. So that is a segment right there. So you've got that segment, all joined together to make a particular diameter of the first, second, or third, or whatever ring you're making.
I'm fascinated by these jigs. So just before we leave this, just tell us a little bit more about this and the different things they can be used for and whatnot.
Okay, well, the jig is basically to get your exact angle, like we just finished cutting in these two samples here. That and that is like, each one of these angles is 15 degrees. But say your angle is, say I didn't get this exactly at 15 degrees and I moved it way over here. Doesn't matter, I can lock that down, put my 30 degree, 60 degree angle back in here, slide this in, and then just keep sliding this up till it stops. Now we still got 30 degrees, but when you cut these things, they're gonna, when you put them all together, they're gonna be in a spiral. Like it's not gonna be exactly even. It'll be offset. So you got a spiral. So one is a different angle all the way around. So you can get, if you're using different hardwoods, for instance, say you're using a light and a dark wood, it would go like almost like would look like a windmill in a spiral. So that's one way of doing it. So like I say, the angle it doesn't have to be. It has to be exact for the 12 segmented ring, but it doesn't have to be exactly 15 degrees on one compared to the other.
It doesn't have to be symmetrical, is what you're saying.
That's right, yeah, because one will be, like if this is way over here, this angle now isn't going to be 15 degrees anymore. It could be 25 degrees. But this one will only be 5 degrees when you put them together, or whatever it happens to be, 20 degrees. So, like I say, this, as long as that and that are in line, you're okay. Now, say you want to make a 24 segment or a 48 segment bowl. To cut these things exact, I mean, this is a 30, 60, 90. They're easy. Any stationery store or drafting store has this stuff. But you want to get one that's got 12 and a half degrees or whatever it happens to be. You have to either cut them and be absolutely dead on doing it, or you can order online a variety of what they call the wedgie templates. So he has a whole series of templates at different angles for your different segmented rings.
Are they made out of plastic?
They're
or
high
metal?
impact plastic. No, they're metal. Well, I guess most of them, I think the ones that Jerry Bennett sells are plastic or phenolic resin.
Is this Jerry Bennett a Canadian?
No, I think he's a Texan. He's also an incredible guitar player because while all his demonstrations going on, he's got his guitar playing in the background, which he's written and played on his songs on his guitar. So you can look it up on YouTube and figure out what that's all about. There's actually a lot of different YouTubes on how to do segmented bowls, and this is one of them. If your angles weren't bang on, what you would then do is you do a half circle and a half circle, and you're putting your segments all together, and you get to the very last one, and it's like this. Now what do? Because these are all joined, but you got this big gap. So you just join half the circle together. You put on a 12 ring, you put 6 segments on, and then you put it on a flat piece of sandpaper or a disc sander, and you sand the two till that angle has been sanded down to fit.
Yes.
But then what's going to happen there? This one and this one aren't going to be exactly the same length as the rest. But I mean, depends how off you are in your angles.
Nobody's going to notice.
No, that's right. Yeah, and this is really off that far, because when you put them together, they'd be like an oval.
Right.
But then when you start turning them, of course, then it goes into a circle. Okay, so that's that. And then again, the stop it's a simple little rig because you just, like I say, you just measure your distance from whatever the plan says, from here to your tooth. Lock it down, and away you go. And it's a lot easier because most of the segments aren't all that long, so you got quite a bit of play here from there, to there. And if you've got quite a big bowl and bigger segments, then of course you just use your fence and a stop block behind the blade somewhere to measure. But it's a lot easier to slide that in, measure it, and then put it back here out of the way so when you're doing your cuts, it's well out of the way of the blade. And this little thing here, as we explained earlier, as you're coming along, let me get all this out of the way. You make your cut. You make your cut, and it falls off and it slides down. It just doesn't sit here and back up. They're all slid out of the way of the blade, so the blade, it won't catch as you get a whole bunch in the line up here and go flying off or catch the end of the blade. So that's basically what that's for.
Okay.
Okay.
Now shall we move on to gluing these rings together?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I want to get this stuff out of the way now.
Okay.
Okay. Now we've cut our 12 segments, And now we gotta glue them all together into a 12 segment ring, like so. You put them all like this. And once you get them all together, then you got to figure out one way how to clamp them to tighten it up so that they're all exactly, you know, they're all in a nice circumference or diameter. So now there's a but you'll notice I've got the squiggly line on the top of each one of these, and then there's also a line on the when I made the boards, I drew a straight line on one side and a squiggly line on the top. So as you're cutting them, you want when you're joining them together, you want to make sure all the little squiggly lines are on the top, like so. You don't want one like this, because if you do, if the angles aren't exact, by going opposite ways, it'll compensate. So you'll notice that on this one, the line's on the outside, this one, the line's on the inside. So you put them together like so, but you keeping the squiggly line always on the top. So that's a line on that one, a blank side on that one, a line on this one, and so on all the way around till you get what you got here. Now you've got to figure out how to clamp them together. If your hands are really big or steady, you can just do that. But you try to do that, and all of a sudden, away they go. Now, of course, these are all glued, so now you got a heck of a mess. So that isn't going to work. So I built this little jig here, and I've made it so these little pegs will all come out and go into different diameters to make each different diameter. So we'll set this up. So we got there's our squiggly line on top with the line on the inside. This one, the line's on the outside with the squiggly on the top, like so, and you just put them all together. That one's over here. That one's over here. This one's okay. That one's there. This is where it gets a little confusing. So you got to make sure that they're all right. Now the trick is you got the reason for the elastic band is that holds the thing together. So you very carefully pull the elastic band off each peg, like so. That holds the ring together, but it's very fragile at this point. Mind you, you're doing this with all this glue on it, so you gotta, it can get a little messy. Okay, there's your ring. So now I can, if I'm very careful, I can pick it up. Okay, and then now, once it's in there, you make sure that these are all, each one of these are all, but you don't want one that's looking like that. You gotta make sure that they're all, you know, in flush with each other, all around there. Okay, like that. So now you can just use just elastic bands, or just cut.
Oh, giant hose.
That jig is a lot easier than these things. Oh, good. Or once it's together, you can band clamp it. Like so, and once it's in there, you can pull your elastic band off, and they won't go anywhere. Then you just tighten your clamp down. That makes it good and tight. But on small ones like this, the elastic bands work equally as well. Now I got to do this back in here. So you put that there. Start putting it around again. So you can go 2 or 3 bands if you want. But basically, now that it's in the ring, basically it's solid. So now you set it aside, you go on to your next ring, you glue that one up. Now you got a whole stack of rings. Okay,
So this jig does not have to be super accurate.
Oh no, because it just sits wild outside. So as long as it sits inside here, and if the next circle might be go out to here, so you move the pegs out 1 or 2 notches, depending on your diameter. Okay, so now they're all glued up. Let's take this out of the way. There's your glued ring, all glued up and solid. As you can see, one's inside, one's outside, inside, outside, all the way around. And the reason for that is, if your angle is slightly off, or your saw isn't exactly 90 degrees to the table, by reversing them, it'll compensate. So you might have this, but it doesn't matter, because it's gonna be rough. You know, like right now, you got all your glue line and everything on here. So then you take it on you put your disc sander. I won't bother doing this, but I'll just leave it here. You stick this on your lathe, hold it up tight, and you sand it. So you got both sides smooth. You just, as it's spinning, you just kind of hold it and get it clean. Or you can just glue a piece of sandpaper, or take a piece of big square and just do that. But I mean, this is a lot easier. Do it that way. So you get your 2 surfaces smooth. Now, if you're making the top ring, you don't worry about the top of the ring, because when you turn it down with with your lathe chisel, that'll make it whatever shape you want. So all you're concerned about is this. So you got the next one. And then after you've got all 4 of your rings glued together, because we're making a 4 stacked segmented bowl with 4 rings, you get all 4 of them together, and then I use this thing. And you can I do a couple at a time. If you're good, you can do a few at a time. But you put your ring in here, and you put your next ring down, and you glue it, and stick the next ring on top, and so on and so on. So you got 4 rings up here, and the key is to get them all centered. But you also want to offset them. So you got 1 ring, you don't want your lines all joining together. So you got the next ring, now the point will be here and here. So each one is offset by half the length of the segment. So you get them all like that, and then you stick your lid on it. And I just use these as spacers, and so on. Put on your nut, clamp it down, and once, next day, or I always like to leave them overnight. Like some say you can do it in an hour or 2, but I don't trust the glue to be that set before I start to do my turning.
So this is what you end up with.
So that's right. We'll get to that in a minute. So now we've got these 1, 2, 3, 4 rings all glued together, and you can see how rough it is. Okay, but you see how I've offset them. Okay, I got 1 here, and this line joins up with this line, and this line joins up with this line, and so on down the line. So that when you put them together, they're offset as you go around. So then I go and turn a circle, like a blank, and I drill a 2 1/4 inch mortise in it, and then I glue that onto the bottom ring, which now goes into the scroll chuck to hook it together. So you got all that. So let's go over to the lathe. So that'll sit like that. And the key is when you're putting these on, to make sure it's pressed up. You don't want it sitting cockeyed like that. You want it tight up against the base of the chuck. Then you just tighten her down. And so now you're ready to go. So then it's just like turning a regular bowl, but the bowl is half already turned. So it makes it a lot easier than turning it from a solid block of wood. So you set her all up. And the nice thing with doing bowls like this, a segmented bowl, you're always planing never into end grain. You're always in the side grain. So you're never going to catch that easy. It's very easy to turn it, and it turns out very quickly. So So, okay, I'm not going to turn it, but I'll show you what happens as we turn part of it. So now you do your turn. Okay, we finished turning the outside of the bowl, and it's all nice. I've sanded it down, and now we go around and start turning the inside of the bowl. As you can see, the inside, I've partially done it already here. So you just set it up, go in there like so. And then away you go. Actually, this shouldn't be on here, but then away you go. Then you finish turning the inside of the bowl like that. And then you can put a fancy piece of ring on the top if you wanted, or you can round this over. You can shape it. There's a variety of ways you can shape it. You can put a little cove in there, or have it going out just like a regular bowl. And then once it's all sanded down like so, then you can take it off. Now, we still got to finish the base, because that's still rough on this side. So once the bowl is all turned inside and out, now you want to clean up the base. So you can see it's all rough and all the rest of it. So here's where what they call a cold jaw chuck comes in. We've turned the inside and the outside of the bowl. Now we want to finish off the base. We want to put a rounded edge on here and clean this up and then make this all nice and smooth and clean. So then you use what they call a cold jaw chuck. And that's just a big overblown chuck which you bolt onto your regular chuck with a series of screws here. And then you can move these rings in or out to whatever size you want. But we're going to mount this on the lathe now. We'll take that off. So I've locked the base of the chuck so it doesn't turn it. You just take that off. Okay. Unlock the. Make sure it clears everything. And then you mount your bowl backwards. Like we had it mounted this way with this on the chuck. Now we're going to turn the bowl around and mount the finished top side of the bowl onto the cold jaw chuck like so. So what I need is just put that in there. I always turn this the wrong way. Tighten it down, but you want to be careful. These things aren't the best system. There's some, when you buy the cold jaw chuck, you can get some aftermarket little holders in here, because these things are spongy. And if your rim is turned or slightly in, then you're not gripping it from the actual edge of it. So that's why these ones are a little bit longer and they're curved and they actually grip around sort of the curve of the bowl a little bit. But that's on there. So once you've got that in, then you're ready to clean up your base. So you just do that. You clean it all up, make it nice. Put a couple of rings in there if you want. And then you're done. So the bowl now is pretty much finished. As far as the actual wood part of it goes. Yeah. Okay, we've got all our bowl finished. We've got it all nicely sanded. I go down to a number 400 sandpaper. Usually, I start out with depending how smooth you get it initially, I start with an 80, 120, 180, 220, 330 or whatever it is, 340, and then up to I finish off with about a 400. And then you get that nice, clean, smooth, satiny finish to it, and it's just lovely, just really nice and satiny. So that's done. And what I use for my finishes, I've used tongue oil, I've used the Watco Danish oil, I've used Turner's polish, and I've just used straight Wool Goose is wood finish. It's just a wax. It's a walnut, beeswax, and linseed oil sometimes mix to come up with. It's just like shoe polish, basically. There. So you just dab that on the cloth, and while it's spinning on the lathe, you just rub that all around. Or you can start with it just by doing it like so, and then put it on the lathe, or just leave it the way it is, and then finish it off. I don't normally do it put finish on the lathe because it spreads out all over the place and it makes a mess. Whereas you put a coat of Tylenol on, you wait for a few minutes, you put another coat on, let it sort of soak in, put another coat on until it won't accept anymore. Then I just really polish it down and get any of the make sure there's none of the liquid still sitting on the surface. So you clean it all down. And then what I always do is I always finish it off with a coat of wax after it's well dried. Leave it for a few days, and then you put the wax on to finish it off.
So the wax is not put on the lathe either?
No, I don't. I just, when I got it, now I've got it upstairs, I'm sitting and watching TV or something, I'll grab a rag and polish away. so there you go.
It beats knitting, huh?
Yeah, that's right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like I like to turn hardwoods. It's a lot easier than turning a soft goods. It's a lot less chance of catching it, or because you can't get a nice real smooth finish on a chisel in a softwood. But I did do one out of pine, which is this one, and it came out quite nice. But you got to be careful because, like I say, you can chew through that pretty quick. And on this one, I've added a nice little decorative ring on the top out of mahogany, and then the solid pine base on the bottom. But this one I've put on just the regular bowl like we did on the lathe there, and then just the solid wood base, so it's all one wood from one end to the other. But the base itself, which is only this half inch or so thick, is all one. It's not segmented, just a solid piece of wood like that. So, and then my kind of trademark is, and a lot of them do that, is you put a couple of rings in here, and then you can inside of each of the two rings. That's what you write down what you're making it out of. In this case, it's made out of maple. I signed it and I dated it. So this was made, last year in the 4th month. This one here was made in June of last year, and it's pine. Wood is pine, and the trim is mahogany. And I sign it again. So that's basically your segmented bowls.
Norm, I understand that you used to be in the chainsaw business.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, so that has a real connection with the wood. Does that have anything to do with what you collected, or how did that lead into you becoming a woodworker, or were you a woodworker first?
Oh, well, I started woodworking back in grade 8, grade 9, and junior high school, I think. And then into when I got into high school, I took a lot of woodworking courses, furniture building courses. And then I went to after I graduated high school, I went into BCIT and took a carpentry course on how to build houses. So I did that for a little while. And then I was working on we were working on the Fine Arts Center out at UBC with a big construction company. And when that project was finished, the construction company had 3 or 4 other projects still on the go, so they weren't bidding on anything new. So a whole bunch of us all got laid off, waiting until the next project got started. So we were sitting around, and my buddy says, "You ever thought about joining the Air Force?" So I ended up joining the Air Force, and I was in there for 4 years. And then I came back out. Started building houses again for about a year, and then got into the marine business, selling marine hardware and equipment. And I started building. My buddy and I bought our first boat together, and then our second boat together, and then I bought his half about of the second boat, and we each sold those a few years later, and we each started building our. I built a 30-foot sailboat, and my buddy built a 35-foot sailboat. He built hulls from a deck and hull kit for him, whereas I just had a bare hull and went from there.
Wow. Wow, that's really interesting.
So that's how I got into the boating industry, or the boat building, but I mean, I was always interested in work right from day one, virtually, and all the way through.
Now, but you ended up selling chainsaws, is that right? So how
Correct.
did you get into that?
Well, after I got out of the Air Force, I did this job and that job for over the next few years, and I finally got into a company called, they were Purvis Ritchie Limited, and they were the distributor of Pioneer chainsaws back in the mid-70s. And I worked for them for 3 years, traveled up in the North Country, right to Prince Rupert and Prince George and everywhere in between, and selling Pioneer. And then I got sort of headhunted by a company called Pacific Equipment, selling Husqvarna. They just took on Husqvarna a year earlier than that, and they were expanding quite rapidly, so they wanted to know if I would work for them with quite a substantial increase in salary, so why not?
Who could say
that was,
no?
That was a 30-second decision.
Yeah. Now that Husqvarna is a really nice brand too, isn't
Yes. Oh yeah. They're like Husqvarna and Stihl are sort of the top two chainsaw manufacturers going now in the professional industry, and they still are. But what made one better than the other was how good the dealer was,
yes.
or in the town that the people were buying them. If he was a Stihl dealer, he'd be selling Stihl saws. If he was a Husky dealer, he'd be pushing Husky. Some dealers had both. So, and they're both good saws, because towards the end, after I got out of Husqvarna, I went to actually work for one of the dealers selling both saws, selling and repairing both saws.
So
then I retired.
So you got into chainsaw mills also?
Well, when I was with Husqvarna and Pioneer in the early years, we were out at the P&E every year, down at the Loggers Bowl, demonstrating our saws. Like the Husqvarna booth was here, the Pioneer booth was across the road here, and we were all demonstrating saws. We were cutting up wood and cutting chairs, and milling lumber with the Alaska mill attachment on the saws, and so on. And when I got with Husqvarna, we started doing a lot of milling. And our boss, Pete Holmquist, he was a good buddy of the guy that put on the logger sports shows all over the province. And he was from Vancouver Island, so they logged a lot of wood, which they brought over from Vancouver Island, which was pine and cedar and alder and you name it. So this is what we were using when we were demonstrating the saws. So I started bringing all this stuff home because nobody else wanted it. They were into woodworking like I was.
Wow.
So every couple of days I'd have a stack of lumber this high, 8 feet long.
Gee.
And this is the result of it over
You
here.
still got some of this stuff.
Yeah, over all those years, going way back to the early 80s, 90s, this is all chainsaw milled lumber.
That's fascinating. So you're still working your supply down.
And so yeah, here's a chainsaw milled piece of curly cherry. That's the rough part. That was the rough part. This is. Then I resawed it down on the bandsaw. I haven't, but that's just a raw piece of lumber. So we got quite a bit. I've got it categories. I've got birch, and I've got the maple here, which we showed you earlier, and in the far corner is cedar, and there's alder and yellow cedar, and so on. So, and when we moved up here, my wife said, "What are you bringing all that bloody old wood up here for?" I said, "Well," I says, "if you go into a lumber yard, you go price a piece of 1x8 or 1x8 8-foot long piece of alder. How much do you think it would cost?" Well, I don't know. She said, "They're probably $100, $200 for a board."
Yeah.
So then she started to realize, I've used quite a bit of it up in the last 12 years I've been here. She started realizing how valuable this stuff was, and it still is, and it's been great. And that's how I got all my wood and my wood supplies over the years.
Yeah. So you've made bowls, you made furniture, you've made toys, and you've made boats. Yeah. So I heard that how keeping busy with a good project is an important part of your life. Would you explain that to me?
Well, I'm getting on in age, and if I don't have nothing to do, you deteriorate. So this is what keeps me going.
I see. So it keeps your mind sharp and keeps you involved.
My wife says, "You're not going to live long enough to do all the projects you've got lined up." I said, "Well, who knows? We'll keep going and see what happens."
You're going to try.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Norm, this has been great. I want to thank you very much on behalf of the Suncoast Woodworkers Guild.
Yep.
This is going to be a really good video, and I want to thank you for opening your shop.
Well, you're most welcome, Dan. It was sure a pleasure to meet Tony as well. So it was going to be, hopefully everybody out there will kind of appreciate what I've done, And we can, maybe upstairs after, we can take a quick run through of some of the projects I made.
Okay,
You know, I've done
yeah,
a
we
lot
can
of
do
furniture
that.
building, so we can go and quickly do that as well.
Yeah, we can do that. So, where did the oak come from?
Well, that when Ken, from Half Moon Bay, orders the wood for the toy contest.
Oh, Ken Walker.
Ken Walker. I said, well, order me X number of sheets of plywood and ship it up at the same load, so we just split the
Right,
cost of the delivery.
right.
So
So that's plywood with solid rails and.
that's correct. Yeah. So the fronts are all solid, and the backs and the actual cabinetry is plywood.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well done. Nice drawer slides too.
They're all in the runners. These faces, the mantle, and that is all cherry from this tree in Burnaby.
That's beautiful. Now, how do you get this pattern into cherry like that?
Well, that's what they call curly cherry. It's just all very knotty, like full of little knots and stuff. But
That's
from
really
what I understand, Dave, the fellow that I got with, he called it curly cherry.
Nice.
It's quite different, you know. You never really seen anything like that before.
Yeah, no, I've never seen it either. That's beautiful.
Very unique. And then the legs fold in,
Oh.
and these drop down.
Very nice. Very nice.
So when we take this on the boat, you know, quite often the docks aren't dead flat because they're just all boards, and the three-legged table, it's always sitting, instead of a four-legged one which would rock
Right.
around, I built this one.
Right. Now, is that pine?
This is straight pine, yeah. Again, milled from Vancouver Island years ago.
And then I guess that's walnut pegs.
Those are teak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Anyhow, there you go for that.
That is cute.
So Norm, I understand that you've got a spring project going,
That's right.
and these are the plans.
Yep.
Just tell us a little bit about this.
Well, I've always wanted to build a little. Years ago, there was 8 of us in one guy's basement over a winter. Built 8 sabots, and a sabot was very similar to this, only it's just 2 sides and 2 pieces on the bottom, and then it's all built on a frame. Well, these are what they call a stitch and glue. You don't need a hogback or a frame to build them on. You just drill little holes all the way around in each one, and then you stitch them together with wire. And then as you do that, you tighten the wire up, and the boat starts to take shape. And it's still rough, And then you once it's all lined up and all squared and everything, then you just run your epoxy resin in the seams between the wire stitches. When the glue's dry, then you can cut your wire, and then put another bigger fillet in on each seam to fill all that in between where the wires were.
Well, let's go outside and take a look at this.
Yep. Okay, here's our structurally finished little project it's called the Eastport Pram, and it's a stitch and glue. And now I've got the first layer of glass on. I've got all the fillets, and I've still got to do a little bit more filleting on the seams. And the fillets are these round curves here, which the whole thing is just glued together. And then you fiberglass the inside of the bottom and the outside of the bottom. And then once you get a couple more layers of epoxy on and lots of sanding, and then 3 or 4 layers of UV varnish, marine spar varnish, and you're all done. And it's a little sailing pram, as you can see here. So.
This is really going to be nice.
Yeah.
Really going to be nice.
Yeah. So I started this just after Christmas, I guess. So, working a couple hours here, a couple hours there, and a week would go by, nothing happens, and you start again.
So it looks like you're starting to come down the pipe
It's
now.
getting down, yeah, we're getting down to the wire now, so we're hoping to have this done in the next couple of weeks, I guess.
So this is where the keel slips in, and,
Yep,
and
that's
that's where the sail slips
The
in.
mast drops down in there, that's correct. Yep.